Everything is mind. Or at least, that is one of the central ideas later associated with Hermeticism, a body of writings that emerged nearly 2,000 years ago in Hellenistic Alexandria and quietly influenced Western mysticism, alchemy, psychology, and esoteric thought ever since. The texts were attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a mysterious figure combining the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. We don't know if he was a real man. Probably not. More likely, the name represented a tradition, Greek and Egyptian thinkers trying to describe the hidden structure of reality. Centuries later, these teachings would be distilled into what became known as the 7 Hermetic principles. Not commandments, not beliefs, but recurring patterns said to govern the relationship between mind, matter, and perception. And once you begin noticing those patterns, something unsettling happens. You stop seeing reality as random. The architecture you were already inside starts to come into view. To see what they were pointing at, you have to know how it was put together. The 7 principles as we know them today were not written in Alexandria. They were named in 1908 in a small book published in Chicago under the pseudonym 3 Initiates. The book was called the Kybalion. It was almost certainly written by a single American occultist, William Walker Atkinson, though he never confirmed it. He presented it as a distillation of an older stream. The stream was real. Whether the distillation was faithful is something each reader has to decide. That distinction matters, because what the Kybalion did was not invention. It was synthesis. It took ideas threaded through 2,000 years of Hermetic literature, through Plotinus, through Renaissance Hermeticism, through alchemy, through Western mysticism, and pressed them into a form that could fit on 7 pages. The framing is modern. The content is older than most empires. That older content survived in the strangest places, in private libraries, in the marginal currents of philosophy that the Enlightenment dismissed as unscientific, in the alchemists who, before being rebranded as failed chemists, were describing an inner experiment as much as an outer one. It survived every century that thought it had killed it. What killed it for us, in this era, was different. We did not burn the books. We just stopped reading them the way they were written. We took a philosophy about the structure of consciousness and reality and either filed it under quaint old beliefs or, worse, extracted lines from it to sell wellness. Here are the 7, in the order they are usually given. Mentalism. The universe is mental in nature. Correspondence. What is above is reflected in what is below. Vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Polarity. Everything contains its opposite. Rhythm. Everything flows. Everything has its tides. Cause and effect. Nothing happens by accident, even when we call it chance. Gender. Every principle has its masculine and feminine modes. Not biological sex, not social roles, structural energies, present in everything. That is the architecture. You may have heard fragments of it before. You almost certainly have. Pieces leak out everywhere. In self-help, in mysticism, in modern spiritual language, in religious teachings that don't know they are quoting ancient Hermetic philosophy. The fragments are why many people think they already understand this material. Most don't. What you have probably not heard is that they are not separate. They are not a list of 7 independent rules. They are facets of one architecture. Each one implies the others. Correspondence. What we will hear later as is above, so below, is itself a statement about the structure of the other 6. Polarity sets up rhythm. Rhythm depends on cause and effect. Cause and effect only makes sense if mentalism is true. Pull on one thread and the others move. You can see this even in the principles you half know. The phrase "as above, so below" is correspondence. It is also, secretly, mentalism, because what is above and what is below are both mental orders. And vibration, because correspondence operates through resonance, not contact. And cause and effect, because the pattern repeats across scales. One sentence, and the architecture is already there. You just have to know how to read it. It is also worth saying clearly what this is not. It is not a religion. There is no founder to revere, no covenant to enter, no salvation on offer. It is not a moral system. The principles are not commandments. They are descriptions of what is. And it is not, despite what later popular spirituality has done with it, a manual for getting what you want. The Hermetic claim is far stranger than that. It does not say that thought creates reality in a personal, manifest your dream life sense. It says, and this is the part that takes the longest to digest, that reality itself is of the same nature as thought. That is why we will not skim these. We will take them one at a time slowly, in the order they make most sense, beginning with the one all the others rest on. Because if the first is wrong, none of the rest matters. And if the first is right, which is what the entire system stakes itself on, then nothing about reality is what you were taught it was. We begin with mind. The first principle of the Hermetic system is the strangest, and the one all the others depend on. It is called mentalism. The claim is simple in its words and almost intolerable in its implication. The universe is mental in nature. Reality, at its base, is not made of matter that occasionally produces minds. It is made of mind, and matter is one of the things mind does. If that sounds familiar, be careful. You have probably heard a softened version of it. The softened version goes, you create your reality with your thoughts. Think positively, and good things appear. Think negatively, and bad things appear. Imagine what you want, and the universe arranges it. That is not mentalism. That is a translation of mentalism into the language of personal consumption. And in being translated that way, it loses almost everything it was saying. The Hermetic claim is not that your individual thoughts shape your personal circumstances. The Hermetic claim is that reality itself, the whole architecture, including you, is a kind of thought. Not your thought, a larger one. This idea is older than the Kybalion by 2,000 years. You find versions of it in Plotinus, the 3rd century philosopher whose entire system rests on the One, an absolute mind from which all reality emanates. You find it in the Egyptian conception of creation as the speech of a god. You find it in Vedic India, in the doctrine that consciousness is the substance of which everything is woven. And you find it, in Greek, written around the same time the Hermetic texts were taking shape, in one of the most famous opening lines in Western literature. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That is the Gospel of John, chapter 1. Word, in the Greek, is logos, a term that meant much more than speech. It meant reason. It meant ordering principle. It meant the structure of mind that gives the world its coherence. The opening of John engages the same logos tradition that runs through the Hermetic corpus, through Philo of Alexandria, through Greek philosophy more broadly. Different doors, same room. The Hermetic version says, the universe is mind. The Johannine version says, "In the beginning was the Logos." Two different vocabularies for one structural intuition that what underlies the world is something more like thought than like thing. It is worth pausing here, because the modern educated mind has been trained to dismiss claims like this almost on contact. The default position of post-Enlightenment thought is that matter is real, mind is what brains do, and any system that reverses that ordering is, at best, a charming relic. Mentalism asks you to suspend that default just long enough to consider the alternative, not to convert, just to consider. This is not a claim you are asked to believe. The Hermetic tradition was never trying to recruit you. It is, however, a claim that, if you take it seriously enough to test it, does something to how you walk through your day. Because if matter is downstream of mind, then the line between inner and outer becomes far less solid than you were taught. The thought you have alone in your kitchen and the city you move through are made, at some deep level, of the same substance. Different expressions, same substrate. You do not have to take this on faith. You can simply notice. Notice how a state of mind tilts the entire texture of what shows up in your day. Notice how attention itself shapes what becomes visible. Notice how a thought can land in your body before language catches up to it. None of this proves mentalism. None of it could. The principle is too large to be proven by anything inside it. But what these noticings can do is loosen something. The assumption that the inside and the outside of you are different in kind. That assumption is a habit, not a discovery. Once it starts to give way, you read your own life differently. The point is not that you wish your way to a parking space. The point is that the wall between consciousness and world is thinner than the modern world taught you. And the Hermetic tradition was trying, patiently, for 2,000 years, to point this out. If mind is the foundation, the question becomes how it expresses itself, how a mental order shows up in matter, in time, in scale. That is the next principle. The phrase is the most quoted in all of Western esotericism. It is also the most misunderstood. As above, so below. 5 words, in the English translation of a sentence from a short text called the Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and usually dated somewhere between the 6th and 8th century, though the tradition behind it is much older. Newton translated the tablet by hand. He kept his copy private. The phrase has been printed on tarot cards, tattooed on shoulders, used to justify horoscopes, repeated in self-help books that have nothing else to do with Hermetic philosophy. Most of those uses are decorative. The principle they decorate is far stranger. Correspondence, the second of the 7, says that what is true at one scale is mirrored at every other scale. The structure of the cosmos repeats inside the structure of a person. The structure of a life repeats inside the structure of a day. The macrocosm and the microcosm are not metaphors for each other. They are the same form, expressed at different magnifications. If that sounds too neat, the principle would agree with you. It is not the claim that everything aligns superficially. It is the claim that the underlying patterns of cycle, of polarity, of mind-organizing matter recur in their basic shape wherever you look. The principle is not original to Hermetic literature. Versions of it appear in pre-Socratic philosophy, in Vedic cosmology, in indigenous mapping traditions, in early Chinese cosmology. What the Hermetic strain did was give it a name and a sentence that fits inside one breath. What does correspondence actually claim? It claims that the patterns by which mind organizes itself at one level are also the patterns by which mind organizes itself at every other level. If thought has direction, the body that holds the thought has direction. If a relationship has rhythm, the day that contains it has rhythm. The shape recurs. It does not claim that the planets cause your personality based on your birthday. It does not claim that your chakras are color-coded to specific astrological signs. The correspondence the Hermetic tradition was pointing at is more rigorous than that, and more interesting. Here is one way to see it. The way a person handles a small disagreement is rarely different in shape from the way they handle a large one. The rhythm of their breath when they are calm is the same rhythm, scaled, as the rhythm of their thinking. The way they enter a room reflects, in some quiet way, the way they enter relationships. Not metaphorically, structurally. The pattern recurs because it is the same pattern. This is sometimes called the mirror principle. Not that one thing causes another at a different scale, but that one form is being expressed at multiple scales at once. It connects directly to the principle we just left. If reality is mental in nature, then patterns of mind will repeat anywhere mind is at work, which, in the Hermetic system, is everywhere. Correspondence is what mentalism looks like in motion across scales. This is also the heart of alchemical practice. The alchemist did not believe the laboratory transformation of lead into gold was symbolic in some loose poetic sense. The alchemist believed that what happened in the vessel and what happened in the soul were instances of the same underlying process. As above, so below. As in matter, so in mind. The point of the work was never the gold. It is also why Hermetic literature talks endlessly about the human being as a microcosm, not as a small version of the universe in any sentimental sense, as an instance of the same form. The body has its rhythms because there are rhythms in everything. The psyche has its dualities because there is polarity in everything. The day has its phases because everything has phases. Macrocosm and microcosm are the same shape at different magnifications. If mentalism is the claim that reality is mental, and correspondence is the claim that mental patterns repeat across scales, the next question is what those patterns actually do. Because, and this is what the next principle adds, none of these recurring forms are still. They oscillate, they pulse, they move. That is where we go next. Try for a moment to find anything in you that is not moving. Your breath is moving, your blood is moving. Your gaze, even when fixed, makes micro-adjustments 3 times a second. The cells in your skin are dividing, dying, replacing themselves. Your thoughts arrive and leave. Your moods rise and fall. There is nothing in you that rests. This is the third principle of the Hermetic system. It is called vibration. And in its original formulation, it says, nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. This is also the principle that modern spiritual language has done the most damage to. You have heard the corrupted version. Raise your vibration. Match the frequency of what you want. High vibe people attract high vibe outcomes. The principle has been compressed into a kind of emotional reward system. Feel better, get better things. That has almost nothing to do with what the Hermetic tradition was pointing at. The Hermetic claim about vibration is not motivational. It is structural. It says that everything that exists exists in a state of motion. That matter, energy, thought, and spirit are not separate substances. They are different modes of one underlying continuum. That is the original claim. Notice what it is not. It is not the claim that your mood determines your luck. It is not the claim that you can vibrate yourself into a better life. It is the claim that the universe, including you, is not made of static objects. It is made of process, of motion stable enough to be mistaken for a thing. The idea is much older than the Kybalion that codified it. You find it 2,400 years before in Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher who wrote that you cannot step into the same river twice, because by the time your foot lands, both the river and the foot have changed. You find it in the Buddha's teaching of impermanence, in which clinging to the appearance of permanence is itself the origin of suffering. You find it in the alchemists, who treated every fixed thing as a temporary equilibrium in a process larger than itself. What all of these traditions noticed, in their own vocabularies, is something a modern viewer can verify in a single afternoon. There is nothing in your experience that is not in motion. The chair you are sitting on is, at the atomic level, a vibrating field. The body you are sitting in is a system of nested rhythms. The mind doing the noticing is a flicker of states, none of which lasts more than a few seconds. The Hermetic principle takes this observation and pushes it further. It says, motion is not something that happens inside the universe. Motion is what the universe is. If mentalism says the universe is mind, and correspondence says mental patterns repeat at every scale, vibration says those patterns are never still. They pulse, they oscillate, they wave through. The cosmos is a song, not a sculpture. What does this mean for the person watching this video, in a room, in a moment that already feels different from the one before it? It means a few things. None of them are about manifesting. It means that nothing in you that hurts is fixed. Pain has a frequency, and frequencies shift. Joy is not a destination, because nothing is a destination. Everything is a passage. The self you wake up as today is not made of the same vibrational pattern you woke up as 5 years ago, even if it carries the same name. Identity is a long, slow wave. This changes how you relate to your own moments. The fear that visits you is moving. The clarity that visits you is moving. They are not facts about who you are. They are weather. Treating them as fixed states is the misreading. Treating them as passing frequencies is the system at work. And stillness, in the Hermetic sense, is not the absence of motion. There is no such thing. Stillness, in this system, is a kind of motion that has stopped fighting itself. A wave that has remembered it is a wave, which makes the next principle almost inevitable. Because if everything moves, then everything moves between something and something else. Motion is never just motion. It is always motion between poles. That is where we go next. Heat and cold are the same thing. That sentence in a physics class was a trick question. Heat is a measurable transfer of energy. Cold is not its own substance. It is the absence, or the relative lower degree, of the same thing. They sit on a single scale, and where you draw the line between them depends on the body of the person feeling it. The Hermetic system noticed this 2,000 years before thermodynamics and made it a principle. Polarity, the fourth of the 7. Its claim, everything contains its opposite. Or more precisely, everything we call by opposite names is actually 2 poles of one thing. Hot and cold are degrees of temperature. Light and dark are degrees of luminescence. Loud and quiet are degrees of vibration. Love and hate, in the Hermetic reading, are degrees of feeling. Action and stillness are degrees of motion. Wisdom and ignorance are degrees of awareness. The pairs we treat as enemies are not enemies. They are the same continuum, divided at some point by language. The intuition has a long pedigree. Heraclitus said it most directly. The path up and the path down, he wrote, are one and the same. The bow and the lyre are united in opposing tension. War and peace are not enemies. They are the same field, differently arranged. 25 centuries later, Hegel built a whole philosophy on a version of this insight. The Hermetic version is older and quieter. This has a practical consequence the Hermetic tradition spent 2 millennia working out. If opposites are degrees of one thing, then movement between them is possible. Not by suppression, by transmutation. The fearful person does not become courageous by erasing fear. Fear and courage are degrees of relation to risk. The transmutation is a shift in degree, not a swap of substance. The cold room does not become warm by replacing the cold with heat. It becomes warm by adding more of what was already on the scale. The alchemists called this the conjunction of opposites, conjunctio oppositorum. It is the central image of their work. The wedding of king and queen, the marriage of sulfur and mercury, the integration of the two halves of something into the larger thing they always were. Jung, working with this same material centuries later, named the psychological version of it the transcendent function, the process by which the psyche holds two opposing positions until a third arrives, not as compromise, but as something that contains them both. You have seen this without the vocabulary. You have seen a love that becomes hate, and a hate that, given time, becomes something gentler than indifference. You have seen the friend who, after a long fight, became closer. You have seen the obsession that wore itself out into understanding. You have felt courage arrive on the far side of fear that did not vanish. That simply matured. The Hermetic principle gives this everyday observation a name. It says the names we use are the issue. Treating love and hate as different kinds of thing is a translation error. The deeper movement is one of degree, one of relation, one of slow rotation around a center that was always the same. What polarity is not is a permission slip to think positively. The principle does not say that bad feelings are illusions, or that pain is just unwelcome positivity, or that you should simply choose a higher pole. The transmutation is real, but slow. It requires the kind of attention most modern lives do not allow. It is closer to the alchemist's furnace than to the affirmation card. It also connects, in a way that takes a moment to see, to the principle we just left. If everything vibrates, then everything has a rate of vibration. And rate has direction, toward more or toward less, toward heat or toward cold, toward love or toward hate. Polarity is what gives vibration its geometry. It tells the wave which way it is going. And if there are poles, and the wave moves between them, the wave does not stay still at either end. It returns. It cycles. It moves through. The poles are not destinations. They are the boundaries of a passage. That passage has a name in the Hermetic system. We will hear it next. Notice what your life is doing right now, whatever you call it. A season, a chapter, a hard year, a soft one, a stretch where everything feels possible, a stretch where everything feels stuck. You already know one thing about it. It will not stay. This is the fifth principle. It is called rhythm, and it says, in its original form, everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. The pendulum's swing manifests in everything. The principle takes the previous one and sets it in time. If polarity says everything has its opposite poles, rhythm says that nothing rests at either pole forever. The motion between them is not random. It is cyclical. It returns. It swings out. It swings back. Everything that breathes has its in-breath and its out-breath. Every inhale already contains the coming exhale. You can see this at every scale. The day has its rhythm. Morning, noon, afternoon, evening, night, and the same again tomorrow. The year has its rhythm. The seasons turn whether or not anyone is watching. A life has its rhythm. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood, the long middle, the long late, the end. A relationship has its rhythm. Closeness, distance, closeness, distance. And the pattern itself becomes the relationship, more than any single peak or trough. A civilization has its rhythm. Rise, flowering, contraction, collapse, the slow re-emergence of something new in the ashes of the old. The cycles are long enough that no single human lifetime sees them complete, which is part of why we keep thinking, every time, that ours will be the one to escape them. Even attention has its rhythm. You cannot hold focus on a single thing forever. The mind narrows, widens, narrows. Every wave needs its trough. This is not new wisdom. Every contemplative tradition has noticed it. Every farmer has lived inside it. The Hermetic system simply names it as a property of the architecture. Not an accident, not a sentiment, but a structural feature of how anything moves through time. What the modern world has lost is not the rhythms themselves. They continue. What it has lost is the literacy of them, the inherited knowledge of where in a cycle one currently is and what to do there. Pre-industrial life was built around the certainty of rhythm, planting, harvest, fallow, planting again. Lives were lived in seasons. The end of each season was not catastrophe. It was a hinge. The modern arrangement, with its illusion of linear progress and its assumption that what feels like the current moment will last, has produced a culture that is constantly surprised by what was always coming. Two questions arise once rhythm is taken seriously. The first is whether you have any relationship to the rhythm at all, or whether you are simply carried by it. The Hermetic tradition gave a precise answer to this. It said, you cannot stop the swing. You cannot freeze the pendulum at the pole you prefer. But you can do something the unaware person cannot. You can refuse to be thrown by it. The Kybalion calls this neutralization. Not denial of the swing, not interference with it, but a kind of inner orientation that does not depend on which end of the cycle is currently passing through. The wave still moves, but the part of you that watches it stops being moved every time. This is what older contemplatives meant by equanimity, not the absence of feeling, the absence of being thrown. The harder question comes next. If everything is rhythmic, what does that mean about the things you most do not want to lose? The Hermetic answer here is severe. It says, nothing you love is exempt. Not your relationships, not your body, not your understanding of yourself, not the version of the world that currently feels solid. All of it is in a rhythm. Some of those rhythms are short. Some of them are slow enough to feel like permanence. None of them are permanent. What the principle offers in return for that severity is not consolation. It is accuracy. Once you know that what arrives will pass and what passes will return, in some form, on some scale, you stop being surprised by the most basic feature of being alive. You start to recognize the swing, and recognizing the swing changes what you do inside it. Now, what causes the swing? What sets it in motion in the first place? What turns the wheel? That is the next principle. And in some ways, it is the principle that takes the longest to stop dismissing. That is where we go next. What turns the wheel? The fifth principle named the rhythm. The sixth principle names what drives it. It is the most resisted of all the principles, and the easiest to misread. It says, in its original form, every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Nothing happens by accident. What we call chance is the name we give to causes we have not yet seen. This is cause and effect. Modern ears hear that claim and reach for the wrong vocabulary. Karma in its flattened form, meaning everything bad that happens to you is your fault, somehow, somewhere, in some life you cannot remember. The manifestation version, meaning you can manipulate the chain of cause and effect by visualizing what you want. The cosmic reward version, meaning the universe is keeping score. The Hermetic principle is not any of those. It is something colder and more interesting. It says only this: reality is coherent. Nothing in it appears from nowhere. Every event sits inside a web of conditions that produced it. Some of those conditions are visible. Most are not. What we call coincidence is not the absence of cause. It is the presence of causes we cannot see at our current resolution. The principle does not require that you know the cause. It only requires that you stop assuming there isn't one. And it adds something the modern world has almost entirely lost. It says causation operates on more than one plane at a time. Physical causes have physical effects, yes, but mental causes have mental effects. Emotional causes have emotional effects, and these planes interpenetrate. A thought is not just a private mental event. In the Hermetic reading, it is also a cause, operating at its own scale, generating consequences at the scale it operates on. This is where the principle gets misused. The pop reading takes that observation and turns it into a marketplace. Think the right thoughts, get the right things. The Hermetic reading is more sober. It says that mental causes have mental effects, primarily. They shape your inner state. They condition your perception. They alter what you are capable of noticing. Whether they reach into the physical world the way wishful spiritualists claim they do is a different question, much larger, and one the Hermetic tradition treats with more care than its modern interpreters do. A moment before we go deeper. If you have followed me this far into the video, through mentalism, through correspondence, through vibration, through polarity, through rhythm, and into the question we are inside right now, you are not the average viewer. You came looking for something demanding, and you stayed when it did not get easier. If you want to keep doing this work with me, subscribe to the channel. We are here every day, with a different doorway into the same architecture. And one thing I want to say to you, specifically, the kind of person who watches a video this long, this slowly, is someone who already suspects the world is structured. You wouldn't be here otherwise. The Hermetic system isn't telling you something new. It is naming what you have been sensing. Now, back to the question we are inside. The most consequential thing the principle says is this. There are two kinds of position one can take inside the chain of cause and effect. You can be effect. You can be cause. Most people are effect, almost all the time. Their inner state is produced by their circumstances. Their reactions are produced by their reactions. The chain operates through them, and they call the result their life. To become cause in the Hermetic sense does not mean to gain magical control of outcomes. It means something narrower and harder. It means to recognize where, in the chain, your participation actually has reach. It means to act, in those places, from your own ground rather than from the momentum of what came before. To insert intention where there was previously only inheritance. The shift is small. The consequences over time are not. This is also the principle that holds the system together. Mentalism gives reality its substance. Correspondence gives it its repetition. Vibration gives it its motion. Polarity gives it its directions. Rhythm gives it its time. Cause and effect is what links them, the law that the whole architecture obeys. And once you have all 6 of those principles in your hands, only one is missing. The principle that names the most subtle, the most misread, and the most pervasive structural quality of the entire system. That is where we go next. Before we name this last principle, I need to do something the Hermetic tradition itself does not do, because it was written before the cultural conversation that requires it. We are about to talk about something called gender. And the moment that word lands in a modern conversation, most listeners are already 3 steps ahead of what is actually being said. They have heard the word used in arguments about identity, about politics, about wellness aesthetics, about masculine versus feminine energies sold online as content. They have heard it abused so often that the original concept underneath it has almost no chance of arriving intact. So before we begin, set all of that down. The Hermetic principle called gender is not about biological sex. It is not about social roles. It is not about masculine and feminine as cultural categories or as identity terms. It is not about who you are or who anyone is. It is about 2 complementary modes of operation that the Hermetic tradition observed at every scale of the universe. 2 modes, not 2 people. Not 2 kinds of person. 2 ways that anything that exists relates to anything else that exists. The tradition borrowed the words masculine and feminine to name them, because those were the available words. The contemporary listener has to translate. In its original formulation, the principle says, gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine modes. Gender manifests on all planes. What the tradition meant by those modes is closer to what we might call active and receptive, or projective and gestative, or generative and formative. The active mode initiates. It projects. It moves outward. It is the cause that begins. The receptive mode holds. It shapes. It transforms what it receives. It is the field that allows the cause to land. Neither is more important than the other. Neither is more spiritual than the other. Without the active mode, nothing begins. Without the receptive mode, nothing develops. Together they constitute the most basic unit of creation in the Hermetic worldview. You can see this at every scale. In nature, the pollen and the ovum, the wave and the shore, lightning and the ground that receives it. In thought, the question that goes out, and the listening that allows the answer to arrive. In creative work, the idea that pushes forward, and the long quiet that lets it find its actual shape. In speech, the word offered, and the attention that meets it. In every conversation you have ever had, both modes have been operating in both people at once. You speak, and you listen. You project, and you receive. The polarity is not between two beings. It is inside the smallest movement of any one being. This is what the Hermetic tradition was naming. It is also why this principle is described as the most pervasive, not because it is obvious, but because it is so present that we stop seeing it. The breath has both modes. Inhale is receptive. Exhale is active. The eye has both modes. It projects attention outward. It receives light. The sentence you are listening to right now has both modes. Words are projected toward you. Meaning is received in you. Without one, the other does nothing. The principle is so embedded in the structure of experience that pointing it out feels almost trivial. Until you notice that civilizations have organized themselves around imbalances of it. Individual lives have been distorted by it, and entire spiritual traditions have failed to honor one of the two modes. The Hermetic tradition's quiet contribution here is to say that no living system functions when one mode is treated as superior to the other. The overactive life burns through itself. The over-receptive life dissipates. Health, at every scale, is the alternation. Wholeness, at every scale, is the inclusion of both. This is the principle that completes the system. Mentalism gave us the substance. Correspondence gave us the recursion. Vibration gave us the motion. Polarity gave us the directions. Rhythm gave us the time. Cause and effect gave us the law. And gender gives us the engine, the active and receptive interplay through which mind moves through itself and creates everything mind can create. The system is complete. What remains is to ask what difference any of this makes. Whether 7 principles, written in Alexandria nearly 2,000 years ago, distilled in Chicago 115 years ago, and described in this room tonight, change anything for the person watching this video? That is the question we will close on. It is fair to ask. What changes, on Monday morning, for the person who watches a video about Hermeticism? If you were hoping that the answer is everything, that the 7 principles install themselves the moment you hear them and rearrange your life, they don't. That has never been what this material does. What it does is quieter and slower and harder to explain to anyone who has not had it happen to them. It changes what you stop being able to ignore. You walk through your day after this kind of material and you start to see the architecture you used to walk past. You catch yourself in a small contraction and you remember it is vibration. You hit the bottom of a long stretch and you remember it is rhythm. The swing has not abandoned you. It is doing what swings do. You sit across from someone whose effect on you do not understand, and you remember it is correspondence. What you are seeing in them is the same form, somewhere, that you contain. You begin to read your own life as if it were written in a language with grammar. That is the subtle transformation. Not magic, not power. Literacy. The slow capacity to read what was already in front of you. The Hermetic tradition was never about escaping the structure of reality. It was about meeting it on its own terms. Most people spend their lives reacting to what they do not understand. The 7 principles do not eliminate the reacting. They give you a frame for what you are reacting to. The pain that arrives is still pain, but it is also rhythm. The opposite that horrifies you is still an opposite, but it is also polarity, the other end of something you already contain. The cause that seems unfair is still unfair, but it is also a cause, and somewhere upstream, there is another, and you are inside the chain. not the way the manifestation people mean it, the way every philosopher who has taken the world seriously has meant it. Nothing the principles deliver is consolation. They deliver coherence. And coherence, in a culture as fragmented as the one most viewers live inside, may be the rarest thing on offer. What does not change is the difficulty. The principles do not make life easier. They make it more legible. That is a different thing. There is something else, harder to put into words. If you take the principles seriously enough to test them, what happens over time is that you stop feeling alone in the structure. You begin to notice that the same intelligence, whatever you want to call it, whatever you don't want to call it, has been operating through every form you have ever encountered. The breath, the cycle, the swing, the cause, the polarity, the recursion, the mind underneath it all. The architecture is not impersonal. Or, and this may be more accurate, it has never been other than personal, because personhood is one of the things it does. The writers in Alexandria did not give us this material because they had answers they wanted to teach. They gave it to us because they noticed the answers were already operating in every reader who would ever encounter the texts, in every room the texts would ever enter. The texts have been waiting. They have outlasted empires, languages, theologies, scientific revolutions. They are still here. They are being read tonight. You are in the room now. The principles have not changed. The room has. The reader has. Whether what you do with that changes, whether you walk out into your morning and read it differently, is the question this kind of material always leaves with the person who finishes it. This video took a long time to make. If it gave you something, not a lesson, but a recognition, there are 3 small things I'd ask. Share it with 5 people in your life who would actually receive it. Not 5 contacts, 5 people. The kind who are looking for this without knowing what to search. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We are here every day. There is much more. And tell me, in the comments, one thing. What landed? Not in summary, in honesty. And tell me what you want me to take on next. The next principle, the next thinker, the next territory. The channel is being made for the people who are watching it, and your comments are how I know what is being received. Until tomorrow. Thank you for the hour.